thank you all for attending. The meeting is now in order. We are here for a budget workshop. So if we could all please stand for the Pledge of Allegiance. Right, if you can get out of your chair. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Tonight we have one order of business in our workshop, and that is to discuss the budget, and we'll turn over the presentation to Matt here in a second. It's a workshop, so we can all talk freely. Thank you guys for coming, those of you that are in the room. We do not have open for public comments tonight, but you can submit comments afterwards if there's questions. And we have the copies as well, which we'll post those at the end of the meeting. We have the dates. So Matt, I'll turn it over to you.
Yeah, Bill's going to start.
Yep.
Okay.
Before Matt starts, I just want to take this opportunity to thank Matt, Chris, Mark, Heather, and Kevin for the work they've done. In the past 2 months, it's been really hard. We have been faced with some really difficult challenges from a budgetary standpoint. We have had numerous meetings, many hours, many difficult conversations. But what I want to commend them for is all of our conversations were student-centered in doing what's best for the kids at HCS. And trying to look at efficiencies, looking at staffing, repurposing staff to try to meet the needs of students and continue to meet the needs of students. And they have done that. They have met every challenge that we have placed in front of them and have done that with the lens of student-centered learning. And I think that's important. And I just want to thank them because I know it's been very difficult. We've had many, many conversations and many sleepless nights as we've navigated this. And I think what you're going to hear from Matt is we have a difficult road ahead of us. And the constraints that we've been placed under, I believe that with the adjustments outlined in what Matt is going to propose, we can continue to provide a sound educational environment to our students. And that's what you're going to hear from us tonight. And obviously you have questions. We're here to answer those questions and have discussions. And I will turn it over to Matt.
Great. Thanks, Bill. Yeah, I would echo the same thing. This team is great to work with. We have had countless meetings, countless discussions. It gets contentious at times, but all in the best interest of our kids in the district and the greater learning community and moving forward. So I think tonight you're going to hear me kind of zip through sort of the things that we've been talking about the last 3 or 4 months, mostly why we're where we're at, sort of a review, if you will. If there's any questions along the way, if you want some clarification or checking for updates or understanding, please jump in. This doesn't have to be formal in the sense that it's just me spitting this out. And then, the last couple slides I think is really what people want to hear, and what you want to hear is where we stand today and what that means as far as programming and moving forward with the budget. So when we get to that point, that's when we'll really open it up. And I won't talk as much. I'll lean more on the team to provide some clarity and answer your questions specific to what's in or what's out of the budget. So with that, we've talked about the challenges. How do we balance the budget and factor in all of the things that are affecting us? So again, we've talked about all of these, most of them at length in the last couple of months, at board meetings, obviously internally at our budget coffees. We have contractual obligations that are a stressor on the budget. There's no way around it. 70 to 80% of our budget is tied up in personnel. That's not unique to Hamilton. That's what you're going to see in any school district. The state budget, which has still not been adopted. So as we speak right now, we have not been notified of a finalized state budget. So it is late. We did get notification last week that it probably would be late. The governor is really digging her heels in with what she's trying to accomplish. So we know that that's a challenge. The middle tenet here that we're going to talk the most about is our student needs. We'll spend the most time on that because that truly is what drives the decisions when we get right down to it. We've talked about the expiration of the grant funding post-COVID and absorbing those additions from that funding into the general fund and the challenge that poses. And then lastly, our ability to raise taxes or increase the tax levy. And I have question marks there because that's sort of a subjective topic. There's risks involved, but we'll talk about that more as we move on. So most importantly, when we talk about our student needs,
Here.
it worked the first time. So when we look at our student needs, our enrollment over the last 8 to 10 years or so has remained relatively constant, which is a good thing. I read somewhere, somebody put out that 92% of school districts have a declining enrollment in New York State, so during that time. So if you've had an enrollment that's been relatively steady, you're ahead of the curve. But with a consistent enrollment, we've seen a drastic change in our student needs. This is information that's been provided from Kevin in his department. We currently have 169 students in this school, K-12, that have an IEP or a 504 plan, and that is determined through the CSE process. It's roughly 30%. That number represents the highest number that figure's ever been historically, and also the highest percentage of our students. The range of those needs has gotten wider, and it's more drastic. Certainly, as we move along, if you have any questions on that, Kevin is equipped to take those. We are anticipating in next year's budget having 11 students that will not be educated within this building, and they are placed in an alternative placement through the CSE. This current year we have 6. So we have 5 additional kids we anticipate in alternative settings next year. We're going to talk about that cost impact of those 5 as we move through this. But to give you some perspective, the total cost in program for those 11 students is $640,000 for next year. We also have an increase in the number of students that are taking career and technical education courses at Madison and Ida BOCES. We have 35 students. Our average over the last 3 years has been right around 35, which is a significant increase. We had as few as 17 or 18 within the last 5 years, 4 or 5 years ago. We had smaller cohorts moving through the high school. But that budget is based on enrollment, and it's based on your 3-year average of attendees. So what BOCES does is they take that total CTE budget and they divide it up to the component districts based on their enrollment. So the bill for us next year, regardless of how many go next year, will be about $350,000. So that's a half-day program. So those 35 students, half of their day they're spending at BOCES. So if you think in terms of FTEs, that's a business office delight, talking about FTEs. 35 kids a half day, that's 17 and a half FTEs. Combine that with the 11 students in out-of-district placements, you're talking basically 28 and a half FTEs, almost $1 million. So when Bill or myself or anybody on this team talks about student needs being at the forefront in the center of all of these discussions, there's no better example of that than what's on this slide. So these students are in programs that they should be in, that they want to be in, and that they're excelling in. But there is a price tag with that. So with that, we have fewer kids in this building taking classes in a traditional setting than we've ever had. Despite that, we've expanded in the last 10 years our advanced placement courses in the secondary from 5 to 8, and our offerings, from 5 to 8 offerings, and our students enrolled in that is almost doubled. So 10 years ago, we had 74 kids enrolled in those 5 offerings. Now we have 138 in those 8, which is fantastic. I mean, that is, kudos to this team for making that happen. kudos to our kids for enrolling in these classes and taking advantage of them. 39 electives currently in the middle school, high school. That's a very fluid number, right, Mark? I mean, that can change a lot depending on the cohorts, the pathways that these kids take towards graduation. But we continue to offer a wide range of programs, offerings, and placements for all of our kids based on academic needs, based on social emotional needs. So I want you to keep that in mind as we navigate through the rest of this presentation and as these folks speak to what they're doing and how we think we're going to get things done. It truly is what is the driving force behind this whole process. Again, these next few slides, I want to spend a little more time on the students because that's going to be more relevant as we get into the slides everybody's interested in. Contractual obligations, we've talked about this. It's about $11 million of a $15 million budget for wages and benefits. Fortunately, our health insurance premium increase this year was 3%, which is huge. We're part of a consortium with 12 other school districts, one library system. That's huge for us. The fact that we're not self-insured, it really mitigates that risk, it spreads out that risk, and we're able to keep those premium increases lower. But all of our contractual obligations, all those personnel costs continue to escalate. We've talked about that at length. It's not just me. Can you give it to one of them?
Give it to one of them.
Hockey players. That'll be too long. We talked about the executive budget proposal. It has a 1% reduction in foundation aid for us. The individual bills at the state level are calling for a hold harmless provision and a minimum aid increase. The governor is really digging her heels in on aid. We have a 3% increase built into the budget. So if in the next week to 10 days, if for some reason it ends up being a 1% reduction or a 1% increase or a 2% increase or a freeze, then we're going to have to adjust. But 3% increase, about $110,000, so that's built into the budget draft. We're still optimistic that that's what's ultimately going to happen. Again, and I've talked about this at length, Jen, obviously, through her advocacy effort, is always quick to complain about me stealing her thunder, so she knows this all too well. The bigger problem is not being addressed, and that is the old formula and what's going to happen moving forward. So, we have been overfunded since 08-09. We've been getting these hold harmless increases. Either way, it's going to be problematic for us. We are wealthier. The governor has really stuck to this idea that school districts are sitting on a pile of money and they don't need these foundation increases. To some extent, it's true. There are a number of districts that are carrying an unencumbered fund balance of over the statutory limit of 4%. We are not. We have been under 4% for years. I couldn't tell you last time we were over. I don't know. So we've done our part. We do have some restricted reserves that we think we can unrestrict and use this year because of the situation that we're in, and I'll talk about that a little bit later on. The grant funding we talked about, $1.1 million from March of 2000 through 24. Really, for us, we were fortunate we didn't have to retroactively apply these funds to expenditures from the COVID years. We were fortunate enough to be able to add staffing and programming, primarily in 22-23 and 23-24, the last 2 years. But obviously, anything funded through through that funding, with those funds going away, has to be absorbed by the general fund, which in turn causes another pinch to the budget. And then lastly, go ahead, Mark, the taxing issue. Our allowable tax levy increase of 4% for next year. The housing market here and the trends with regard to assessments continues to be a problem. Our tax rate is decreasing. Assessments are increasing, which is an inverse relationship that you would expect. But ultimately, the tax liability for property owners continues to increase and outpace other inflationary factors, which is hard for us. So we'll talk about that a little more as we go through too. So any questions on the to that point? That really should have been a review. I hope that anything in the first 10 minutes or so didn't come as a major shock. It shouldn't. So now I want to get into where we're at today, and I think this is what people want to hear. This is what people want to know. This is what you want to know. This is what we've been working so hard toward in the last few weeks. I just want to remind you, and the team can attest to this, this whole process is so fluid. Things can change by day, by half a day, by hour, depending on what's going on with student needs. That is the biggest thing that drives this. So what's in the current budget draft that we've arrived at? First and foremost, what's in is, I mentioned these 5 additional students that we anticipate placing in outside placements next year. Why is that important? One, it's expensive. So the anticipated tuition or cost of these programs for these 5 students is around $285,000. So if you remember that previous slide, that's of that 640 for the 11 kids, the 5 additional new kids for next year, about 285,000. So that's a lot. The other reason that's important is because that obviously has an effect on resources here in the building. And as we get into what's out and how we intend to do things, you may be hearing more on that from the team over here. One of the things that we heard loud and clear through the process of having budget coffees, through our public forums, through community input, is the need in the area of SEL, social emotional learning. One of the positions that was added through the COVID fundings was our SEL coordinator. We're happy to report tonight that in this current budget draft, we have retention of the SEL coordinator and a retention of the SEL room that has been added for essentially the last 2 years. There will be some restructuring with regard to that department, that position, and how things work. And we'll talk about that a little bit more with the what's out and then after if you have questions. But that was something that we heard loud and clear. There's no other way to put it. Bill and I heard it. The team heard it. I heard it again from the team in meetings, and it became a priority and a focus, frankly, in the last couple of weeks. All in-district student services required through the CSE. I mean, this is really a non-negotiable item, but this is something else that we heard from many community members, that there was a concern that there'd be a loss of services. And what I'm referring to is, in most cases, services that are required as a result of the CSE process, counseling, OT, PT, speech, all of those requirements are still going to be met. So all of the staffing and that's required to meet those requirements through the CSE is still in there. We're also thrilled that we're going to be able to retain the social worker that we are currently benefiting from through Madison County. That's something that we are applying COVID funds to this current year, but we are retaining that position in the next year. Anytime, this has come up in the past. We've had something similar to this in the past in collaboration with Madison County and Community Memorial Hospital. It was short-lived. So anytime we have these opportunities through collaboration, we take advantage of them. There's always some uncertainty whether they'll continue, whether the county can find people, whether the county has the resources to create these positions. So we have been able to confirm that will continue to be available to us, and actually available to us cheaper than it was this year because of their ability to bill for services provided. So that's great news. So that's what's in. And I know the reason we're stressing these things that are in is because these are either things that are having a significant impact on the budget, or they're things that have really come to light through community feedback or our internal discussions, again, with the focus on student needs. So what's out? One elementary teaching position through attrition. So we do have a teacher that's retiring, so we are going to have some restructuring in the elementary. That doesn't mean that we're going to have one less elementary teacher in one of our grade levels. We can't do that. We have to have 2 teachers at every grade level. What it does mean is that we will be moving to one section of half-day pre-K. Unfortunately, this decision was, obviously there's a budget savings, but unfortunately, our registration and our enrollment numbers made this an easier decision. We only had 20 kids register for pre-K, which is concerning long-term. That number has declined over the years. We currently have 19, Heather, current year?
Yes.
19. So currently, we have 2 half-day sections of pre-K. 10 in one section, 9 in the other. Next year, we'll have one section of 18 kids. So unfortunately, by restricting or limiting to one section, we did have to do a lottery, and we do have 2 kids that were placed on a waiting list. But that is a significant budget savings, and we do have a little bit of a restructuring there as far as staffing to cover those positions. We've had the benefit of a behavioral specialist that we've been able to hire with the use of COVID funds. That is currently not in the budget for next year. I mentioned restructuring, retaining and restructuring with the SEL coordinator. Those 2 are kind of combined, as well as the top bullet on the other side. Kevin will address any questions on that as I continue through this. The part-time elementary math support that was added with the COVID funds is out. We have one of our retirees that's been back with us for the last 2 years providing math support. That is currently out. A high school science position is out. That position will be combined with an existing special ed teacher. And Mark can talk a little bit more, and Kevin, about how that combination is going to work. And then lastly, a reduction of one full-time equivalent in buildings and grounds department. We had a vacancy earlier this year. We had somebody leave us, and we've been operating with one less FTE since then. And though not ideal, it's something that we think we can try to navigate moving forward with one less person. We've been able to do so for the last few months, and we're going to give it a shot next year. So that is sort of the narrative as to what's in and what's out. Now, Mark, I'm going to have you jump ahead one more slide, and then we'll come back to this one for questions, because I would imagine this is where the questions are going to be. So what does that mean? That's what's in, that's what's out. Where are we? The draft, if you will, would be total expenditures of just shy of $15.7 million, which reflects a 4.5% increase over the current year's expenditures. We are not quite tax cap compliant with where we're at as we speak right now. That budget, that expenditure plan, if you will, would require to balance a 5.45% increase. Now remember, our allowable increase is 4.0. So that 1.45% excess or equates to about $120,000 over being tax cap compliant. So we're close. We're not quite there. The other thing that this draft does is, and I alluded to this earlier, it does utilize some reserves. We looked at as I said, we are not over 4% for our unencumbered fund balance. We do, however, have some restricted reserves that we believe and we are comfortable recommending sort of unrestricting those and using them to fill this budget gap. Now, the problem becomes basically the same thing with the COVID funding. Any one-time infusion, any one-time source of revenue creates a problem for the following year. So you can see here, this, I believe this $750,000 in reserves over the next 4 years. If we were going to allocate all 750,000 of those reserves next year, what do you do in year 2? So this plan utilizes 300,000 in reserves next year, in next year's budget, and then that decreases by 75,000 each year. So we're comfortable in doing that, and that helps soften the blow, if you will. Essentially what it's doing is it's spreading out the elimination of the COVID funding basically from this year through 2028 by using reserves and slowly sort of weaning ourselves off that money. Now what does that mean? That means that in future years we're going to have to continue to look at things, we're going to have to continue to be efficient, we're going to have to continue to try to recognize savings through attrition and constant evaluation of our student needs. So long-term planning in school district budgets is a very difficult thing, especially in a small district of our size. You've seen how much our needs have changed in the last few years. Who knows what things are going to look like in 2027, 28. But we feel safe in recommending this in order to put us in the best position moving forward. We are still very much in range, I would say, of becoming tax cap compliant. We are considering other revenue sources, both short-term and long-term, through community partners. We've had meetings with Colgate. We're pursuing grant opportunities. Anything we can do to try to get to that 4%, we are trying to do. It's very fluid. So I don't know if you want to comment any more on that, Bill, as far as what we're trying to do.
Sure. Right before this meeting, I received a call from Colgate, excuse me, and they have agreed to make a one-time payment to help offset some of our gap. So that is terrific news for us. That helps close that gap and take us closer to being tax cap compliant. So, you know, Colgate has been extremely kind to us. Every year they make a gift to this district. And that gift allows us to continue to offer the staffing and programming that our students need. And we could not be more thankful to them, to President Casey, J.S. Hope, Joanne Borfitz, their senior leadership team, for their continual support and commitment to this district, because without that, we would be in a very different financial situation.
And just to make sure, I want to make sure everybody understands this. Colgate does not have to give us a nickel. That's the reality. You know, Bill references a gift. It truly is a voluntary payment. I think oftentimes people in this community think that it's a payment in lieu of taxes or some sort of pilot where there's an agreement that they are obligated to give us money. It's not. It is strictly a voluntary payment. And I know, because I've called other school districts in New York State that have similar relationships with institutions of higher education, they don't get a nickel. What Colgate does for us extends so far beyond just the check that we get in the fall of this voluntary payment. The relationships that we have with them, I mean, there are Colgate people in this building daily. We are sending people up there frequently. So it's a fantastic relationship. They are also our largest taxpayer, which I think it's something else that often gets lost. I don't know this, but I would be willing to bet that many of the properties that they pay taxes on, they wouldn't have to if they didn't want to. They've made that choice to put those properties on the tax roll. So they are, you know, this current year, they are our largest taxpayer. They have 67 parcels that are on the tax rolls that generates roughly $250,000 in tax revenue. So think about that. You've got approximately $500,000 in tax revenue and voluntary payment from Colgate. That if those didn't exist, that's another $500,000 that would be borne by the rest of the tax base here. So it's remarkable, and like when I said that things are so fluid, I mean, that phone call Bill got today, I don't know, maybe it was not a coincidence that it was in advance of this meeting, but it wasn't in enough advance of this meeting to change this presentation. So believe me, if it was, it would be up there. So it truly is so fluid. We've done a lot of work in that sense. So we're getting close. We're going to keep pushing. But things can change that quickly. So I guess what I would like to do is, if there are any questions for me at this point with regard to the budget, the process, any of the, I'll say, fiscal components of what we've talked about, I'd like to take those now. If not, we'll go back a slide and discuss program and staffing further, and I'll ask the team to jump in. They're ready. And then they'll throw it back to Bill and I to kind of wrap things up. So if that's okay with you folks, that's kind of how we envision this going.
When you talk about things being fluid from your point on, the waiting on the state budget to be finalized, and you got the news from Colgate as well, and for that to be finalized. So some of these numbers in terms of being tax cap compliant, you're saying that could change. Going back to programs and staffing, is that contingent on some of that fluidity?
Do you want to go to the next slide first? Go 2 slides forward, because I think that answers some of that, doesn't it? Budgetary and tax class.
This one?
Yeah, doesn't that help it?
I don't know.
Or no?
Not if, I think to answer Sung's question is, so what if we don't get any more funding and we want to be tax cap compliant, we're going to have to make more changes with staffing and programming.
Mm-hmm.
If we do get more funding, that funding is going to do one of 2 things. We're either going to work towards being tax cap compliant, or add things back in. Is that kind of what you're asking?
Yeah, I'm asking, so just to rephrase the question, you're getting to it. How much of the fluid in staffing is fluid? You're saying, you guys have laid out what's in and what's out, and will some of that change depending on?
Depending on the severity of what the state budget looks like, it could be, if the governor agrees to a 1% as opposed to a 3% that we have built in, that's $64,000 that we would have to make up. So that could have an impact on staffing and programming, absolutely.
Yeah.
But I think these program and staffing items have been vetted so much, and we've talked about it so much. I think we've arrived at a point where we think we can do this.
Okay.
Okay, right? I don't want to speak for these folks, but, it's not ideal by any stretch. I mean, we'll all tell you, every meeting starts with, well, we don't even want to talk about this, right? That's the one thing we agree on. We don't want to have to talk about this. It's not ideal. We'd love to just keep adding and continuing to do things the way we're doing, but it's not realistic. So I don't know if that helps, but, these are the things that we think, by doing things a little bit differently, that we'll be okay moving forward. So with that, I guess if there's any specific questions on programs and staffing, I would just ask one, we are in public session. Any positions that are referenced, they're obviously referenced because we've had conversations internally. I just ask you don't use any names, so. Some of these positions may be easily identifiable with a particular person, but in the interest of maintaining the personnel privacy, I ask you not to use any names, but certainly any positions that are mentioned are okay.
I have a question.
Sure?
The part-time elementary math support,
Yep.
how many kids currently utilize that?
That's a question for that side.
I can wait.
Yeah, no.
Or just generally,
Yeah,
like
we
who?
I think
Yeah,
this is
no.
the time, like,
Yeah,
before,
this is
this
time,
is the
yeah.
time to ask
Yeah.
questions.
So I don't have exact numbers in front of me, but that number is fluid. So the position is half-time. There are 5 different groups that are serviced. And then actually sometimes those groups kind of have shifted. Like I actually know this week, a new little group was put in place, so based off of student needs. And there are some students that utilize that in either a pull-out way, so they are pulled out of the classroom to receive support, and some utilize it, some actual classes utilize that support, where somebody is pushing into the classroom to provide support. So it's difficult to pinpoint the number. It's a little bit different than some of our other RTI programs where I can tell you exactly the numbers because it has shifted and changed. But it's a half-time position, so it's about half of half of the school time. Is what it is. So.
And
that's-
do you have a plan for, who's gonna
Yeah.
help out with those kids that still need those
Right.
sorts of services?
So one of the things is we haven't had elementary RTI math support for a number of years, up until what was it, the 22-23 school year? And one of the charges for the funding that was put forth from the federal government was specifically to catch students up from the time when they were not, when we were in hybrid and actually, some very limited classes. So I just really felt at that point in time that was a really good use of funding to make sure that we really address that, because we do have reading support in the elementary and have had that. So that was, I think we entered into that with an understanding that this was really to help students make gains that maybe they had lost during that time.
Okay.
However, having said that, we have just implemented a new math curriculum, and it's been really well received by teachers. I think that is going to help support our students. It's consistent. It starts in pre-K and it will, continues up through 5th grade. Teachers have responded really well to it. We've employed the services and support of Madison Oneida OC's professional development staff, which has been a great connection this year. So I think that will continue, that relationship will continue. So in the classroom, the curriculum implementation, it will be stronger this upcoming year, even more so than it has been this year. And then in addition to that, I've had, suggestions from the administrative team as well as from teachers and staff about some different creative ways that we can work with those children. So those are all things that we're going to explore.
Or maybe,
further,
like they were talking about at the steering committee about, partnering with the Cove, and how there are always students that are pushing into classrooms, and maybe that's an opportunity to
strengthen
kind of
that. Yep,
strengthen this by utilizing
absolutely.
them, so.
Yep. And math, I think we did mention that steering team was an area that really works well to partner with Colgate students. So, so that I didn't even.
I don't know if you'd add resource classes, like if there's extra numbers, we could always add RTI kids to that.
Oh, for our resource classes, right?
Yeah, I can talk about that.
Yeah, you want to talk about that?
So we
Yeah.
still offer our full slate of special education for students, and one of those is resource math. So we have students in K through 5 that have resource math needs. In a resource math class, you can have up to 5 students. It's typical that these classes have 2, 3, or 4 kids in them. So if you have some of your students who aren't special education, who would be in that RTI kind of support need, more so on the students that really need that extra help, the more severity, they could push into those resource classes as long as it doesn't go over that number of 5. And they currently do that now. We have a few of our upper intermediate students do push into the resource classes to get some extra supplementary math help. So there's still a little place for students to go to get that additional help too.
But generally, you guys are comfortable that the students that do utilize whatever that part-time position covered are still gonna have the support that they need?
Yeah, we're going to work really hard to make sure that happens.
I mean, yeah, I mean,
You know.
Well, it's not, yeah.
perfect world would be great to have that extra person, but.
Okay. Thank you.
I guess my question is similar to this. If, in an ideal world, what would be the priority list for achieving these things? What goes to the top of the table for you?
Might be
You gotta get three different answers.
I'm happy to hear 3 different answers.
Well, yeah, I mean, certainly we're all gonna defend our buildings and our departments, but.
I mean, I don't mean to jump in there, but like, I honestly think that that's a tough question to pose.
Like, I'm fine if you all have different answers. It's just to know where that would be.
Yeah.
Pretty
I just-
straightforward.
I think the what's in with the social worker is
Well, I mean, of the
is
what's
awesome.
out.
Of the what's out.
The what's in.
I was trying to take the easy way.
I think they would answer everything that's out in.
Yeah.
I think the good thing is you've found ways that with the what's outs are being covered, right? So anything in the what's outside, you're covering some way, not as well, but hopefully pretty close, as we actually get to the final number and the final situation, that the things that you were able to decide on the what's outside, you could do so because you could find ways to cover that through different schedules and different ways of working. I know it'll be a shift for a lot of people, it'll be a shift for all of you to have to manage that as well, but again, we're in the do more with less situation, unfortunately.
Well, I think thankfully we have some faculty members that are dual certified that allow us to creatively do some things differently and cover with some of the things that are out.
Dual certified for a subject like
Yeah, you
science
might be-
and special ed or something like
Exactly.
that.
Yep. Yep.
Okay.
Yep, exactly.
Mark, I'm curious what progress has been made, if any, with all this other stuff, with creating more efficiencies with the number of electives that we had. I know there was early conversations on maybe offering them every other year or things like that to try to have some savings there, but still be able to offer all those to the students.
Yeah, so with the science, we may see that. Do some of the courses to alternate those every other year, depending on, individual teacher's course load. They aren't going over their contractual obligations within that, and then looking at the student interest in each of those as well. And, that's a possibility going forward. And we also might have some changes in other areas upcoming as well that as Bill was kind of talking about, with dual certifications, might be able to help in some of the spots too, to cover different things at different times.
I know, where did the page go?
Could you talk a little bit about the high school science position combined with the special ed position, which science? And how much time is sort of balanced between teaching and doing special ed?
So there would be, we look at adding 2 classes of science to the special education teacher's schedule. 2 other classes would be absorbed possibly in different areas.
Possibly people with dual certification,
Right.
so that's.
And sometimes teachers do teach out of their certification in certain classes, and so we'll look at who's best fit for that as well.
You're allowed, you're allowed to teach one out of your certification area in New York State.
And so the impact on students for this would be a reduction of an elective? Like what would be the impact of students, the students would see in turn, like they would have
Science.
one less elective?
With science, it's possible that we wouldn't be able to cover one elective. That it might, could be an extracurricular or something like that. We're gonna try to cover it. It's gonna take some work and moving of things, and we do have opportunity coming up that possibly we can get somebody that has experience in that area as well to be able to absorb that class. But yeah, it could result in that. It also results in, you have fewer spots, right, on a schedule to place courses and to make them fit nicely in with everybody else's schedules. So anytime there's a reduction, that puts more constraints on just the scheduling process. So it's possible that it could lead to people having to make choices. Like, okay, I'm not gonna take that this year, I'll take it next year, because that works better. So it does make the scheduling process a little bit more complicated, because you have fewer boxes to put things in to make it fit nicely, but.
So the same class would be offered, just maybe not multiple sections of that class?
That, or we wouldn't have the flexibility to put it in multiple areas for.
One less person in there.
Right.
So there's essentially six less squares to do slots, so.
Yeah.
It makes it less flexible.
Yeah, but on the student end, hopefully we can find those spots where everybody's still getting those courses that they want to take.
Is it possible that some of the courses might have a higher population of students in them?
That's, yeah.
That could possibly have, yeah.
I have another little tough question. With the loss of the behavioral specialist, are there going to be instances where our students are going to need to go somewhere else for maybe getting help that they're getting with a specialist, or are we going to be able to cover all the things that we're doing currently?
Yeah, that's one, we've thought about that question quite deeply. We feel like, yes, that may put a little more strain on the existing SEL team members, but we're able to repurpose the responsibilities of the behavioral support specialists with the existing members on the SEL team. It certainly will be a little more.
We don't feel it will cause a lack of services that a family will have to seek outside services that we currently offer inside.
Thank you.
If that helps answer your question.
Yeah, it does. Thank you.
Because I know there was some concern from community members about that. If we do have a reduction in the SEL support, will then families have to incur the cost of seeking outside services?
Right.
And we're hopeful that we are going to be able to continue to offer the services internally so that we don't have to place that burden on families.
Thanks.
With that said, if we feel that a family or a student does need outside services, we'll continue to recommend that they seek outside services. But that's no different than what we do now.
Sure.
Any other questions? I'm trying to let the silence, but I don't love silence, so I'm gonna just talk for a minute. Well,
The wheels are turning.
well, right, well, the wheels turn, but, thought, should we move to the last?
Sure, we can move on, we can always come back too.
Come back?
Yep. Mark, you can just go ahead, leave it here for a second. So again, this is sort of back to, I think, Sung's first question, and Michelle, what you were alluding to, just to give you an idea of sort of the relationship between what certain things may have on the budget or how the budget relates to the tax levy. If we want to increase the budget by 1%, it's roughly $150,000. So if that 1% increase in the budget was consumed entirely by a tax levy increase, it would be 1.73% to increase the tax levy. So to increase the budget 1%, you'd have to increase the tax levy 1.73. Just shows that relationship. 1% of the tax levy is $84,000. So that equates to just over 0.5% of a budget increase. So just to give you some context as to when we start talking about increasing one side or the other by 1%, what would be required on the other side. Sort of coincidentally and conveniently, 84,000 for 1% on the tax levy, that is typically pretty close to the average expense for a full-time equivalent for an instructional employee, so for a teacher. So it's really pretty simple in terms of this exercise of if you wanted to add a teacher, it would be the equivalent of a 1% tax levy increase. So when looking at the what's out column from a couple slides ago on the right-hand side, when you consider those in terms of FTEs, the approximate impact on those positions or those FTEs is roughly 4.5%. Okay, so
Which would put us out at a 10%
would be a 10%.
increase
Yep.
if we were to not have anything on the what's out.
Yeah. So I don't know if that helps give you an idea. So if you think back to, I don't know if it was December or, when the first exercise we did when we were talking about personnel, and we said we were at 10 to 12 without even considering all the other things that are going up and escalation of costs. Well, really, that's really kind of where we ended up, because we had savings in some areas, but then we had, those 5 additional students.
The reserve.
At 285,000, yep, use of the reserves. Really the reserves, in essence, we never go through this exercise sort of pairing things up. Like, it just so happens to, like, for me, my eye catches, well, really, it's reserves next year's covering the expense of those 5 outside placements. That wasn't intentional, but you just sort of see these certain numbers kind of correlate. But you put it all together, it kind of makes sense that that's sort of right back where we ended up. So really, things didn't really change a whole lot in the grand scheme of things from what we talked about in December. It really sort of stayed true to what we were doing. So hopefully that gives you a better understanding of some context of sort of where we were, why we're there. Certainly, we talk about the why all the time, where we are now, and again, thank you to these guys. And then the last thing I'm going to close with, and then if you have any other questions for these guys, if you want to come back, you certainly can. So what's next? We have 3 opportunities for community feedback. Anybody that wasn't able to attend tonight, if you're watching from home and you have questions or you want to offer feedback or you want more clarification, tomorrow morning, 9 o'clock, and then Tuesday, 9 a.m. and 5 p.m., we have 2 more opportunities through our budget coffees. Again, if you haven't attended those are much less formal. We like to just kind of sit around in a circle and talk about things, and that's kind of the format we'll stick with. I think it's the most comforting, and it elicits the most feedback from people. Other than that, the next really 10 days or so, it's just fine tuning. Like we talked about today, we had a real favorable phone call this evening. Tomorrow morning, we're going to factor that in. We're going to have probably 2 to 3 more meetings with our team to update each other on where we're at. Like I said, we're pursuing other revenue sources, grant opportunities to try to close that final gap. Regardless of what happens with the state budget, regardless, things don't stop being fluid once we adopt the budget. It's fluid it's fluid in September, it's fluid in July. But we have a strict timeline. So I've said this before, the third Tuesday in May, we vote. We work backwards off of that. So on Tuesday, April 16th, you're going to get an update, and we will be either asking you to adopt a budget for 24-25, or we're going to have to schedule a special board meeting, because that has to be done prior to, I believe, the 26th, which is the Friday of break. So it's not a favorable calendar for going through this. We're hopefully going to get good news between now and April 16th. We're going to keep working, but you never know. So that's the timeline. So we will be prepared with a budget for that meeting. And if you don't think we're ready, if we don't think we're ready, we'll let you know. But we're gonna try like crazy to get there.
That's the plan.
Other questions, thoughts, comments?
So the benefit of, if we were to say, let's just ask for to request it over the tax cap, the benefit is we don't have to worry about this year to year, right? A lot of these issues that keep coming up, we can kind of keep things in perpetuity. What are the drawbacks that you worry about?
Yeah, so the first part, just to confirm, I think I understand what you're saying. Once you obtain a levy through a successful vote, that becomes your baseline for the next year. So that money becomes your baseline number for the following year. The risk is the contingency process, should it not pass. Obviously, with an override, you have to obtain the supermajority of 60% rather than a simple majority of 50. So if we do go for an override, we do have to have a higher passing percentage. Should it get voted down, then you go through the contingency process, which is basically, you have a couple options. You can go to contingency, which I wouldn't recommend, because the contingency budget is a 0% tax levy increase. You don't go back to your allowable, you just go to 0. So, if we went out at 10 and failed and had to go to contingency, that's $850,000 roughly, or $834,000 that we'd have to account for. Typically what happens is you do a revote, which I believe is, I think it's the third Tuesday in June. There's a statewide revote date. And basically you just kind of reset the clock and you start, it's the same process. You have to send out a budget notice, you have to have a budget hearing before the vote, and you vote again. If you're not successful in that revote, then you go to contingency. With the revote, you can do whatever you want. You can ask for more. You can say, all right, we asked for 10, we didn't get it. Well, since we didn't get it, this and this has changed, now we need 14. You can do that. You can go to 6, you can go to 4, but if it's tax cap compliant, you need the simple majority. If it's an override, you have to have that same majority. So I don't know if that.
Yeah.
So there's definite differences depending on what that levy number's at.
And in terms of the impact on the community, Bill, I know you've thought about this, asking to raise the taxes. What are your thoughts on?
I think, obviously, it's a risk, given the uncertainty of our tax base right now, and thinking about a capital project that is coming in, hopefully, December, a vote, to put that burden on top of an override is something I think we should discuss.
We talked about this, we had a good conversation at one of our coffees, too, is we're at a disadvantage as a school district, as a taxing entity. We go last. The county and the town are on a calendar year, fiscal year, so their 2024 tax levies have already been established. The increases are already established, people are already feeling that. The village is slightly before us. I think they're June through May fiscal year. So by that third Tuesday in May, we're sort of the last taxing entity that's out there. So that's a disadvantage. We're the only one that has a vote. We've heard feedback from people that feel very strongly about an override, how important this is to them. We hear it from the other side too. So, to try to gauge, I have people say, what do you think? Do you think we could get it? I have no idea. That's certainly not something I want to put myself in a position in predicting or projecting. One side of it could be, well, our budget always passes easily. Well, why does it pass easily? Is it because it's tax cap compliant? We've had one budget pass with an approval percentage in the 60s, and that was the one that was the override. So that was our lowest. So it's really tough to gauge. It really is. We get all sorts of feedback.
Thanks.
Sure.
Other questions at the moment? No, we've assigned ourselves some budget copies, so I think the majority of us will be able to be, if not all of us, will be at one
Good.
of them.
That's great.
Trying our best not to have more than two at any of them on purpose. And so hopefully that works out for that. But, keep us posted. Questions and concerns that come up from those.
Yep. And those will be very important in what happens between now and April 16th. I mean, those are very important for us to elicit feedback and obtain feedback between now and the 16th, which is the next time that we'll convene in a formal setting. So I think that's great if you can be there to hear that.
Meeting places, I hate to cut us off, so I'll just keep looking. Are we still processing, thinking for questions, or are we going to process overnight and bring questions later if needed?
Yeah, I'm good. I think this is just part of the process, and we've got more to the process, right?
Yeah,
to
Yeah.
go
yeah,
through, so.
yeah, there's more thinking and
I just don't want to
conversations.
move to a motion to adjourn if
Well,
it's not ready.
Like Matt said, a lot of this was review, things that you've gone over with us during the budget coffees. So we didn't get to ask all of the questions, maybe some questions that people are wanting us to, we're watching and wanting us to ask. So I think I'm just going to reiterate that the 3 budget coffees that are coming up on the 4th and the 9th are good opportunities to come and ask those questions. But thank you guys for all the work that you put into this, and I think the new thing for me is just is very helpful to see the programs and staffing page. I know a lot of this is stuff that we've talked about, but it contextualizes the budget. And it does show the priority that you guys have put into in thinking about student needs. So thank you very much.
Yes, I would thank you folks as well, and anybody that's listening for your patience. I know I get a sense that, these last couple slides, this is really what people wanted to hear. It's very delicate, it's difficult to navigate, it's not something that we take lightly. You know, we understand the desire to hear these things. We have to be very cognizant of people's, you know, from a professional standpoint, from a personal standpoint, from a personnel standpoint, it's really hard to navigate. So I thank everybody for their patience and hanging with us to get to this point.
On that note, can I have a motion to adjourn the meeting?
I'll move.
All those in favor?
Aye.
All those opposed? Meeting adjourned, 8:05.